So a short while later, maybe 1.5 hours or so, and we are now just seeing the next form. This is the form that just appears once that system is already provisioned. What you see here in detail is the license detail, of course, and you can end your trial. Please don't do that. If you click end the trial, it will be decommissioned. So be careful with that. Database access is then something we will as well look in a second on it. Typically, you will here enter IP addresses that are allowed to connect to the database. We will show that in a later step. The first thing we will do in a second is download the tools locally on my machine so that I can then use the application server connection just to talk with the tools with the database. Some more information a little bit down below. As you easily can see, first of all, some URLs. There's a URL to the API server and the web front. There's the URL to the application server. We'll need that. And there's a URL to a job server, which is installed in your on-demand installation. There is also a username with passwords. This is a system user, of course. We have here synchronization users with passwords. And there is then the database access or the string for the database access, database name, database user, password for that, so that you can all use of that. The database, of course, is encrypted, which is for security reasons. And of course, here is an encryption key that could be used to decrypt the database if necessary. So this is the overview. Next step, what we will do is just download the client. I'm clicking here on download the client. And I will automatically getting guided to the download section. Here are separate, I like to say, on-demand identity manager setup sets. I will take 9.2.1 because I have created my Starling edition seconds ago, so it will be the newest, I'm very sure. I have to sign in, and now I'm able to download that very specific file by agreeing conditions, all the conditions, and say download now. So with finishing the download, I can then locally just open here my download. And to get that setup set installed, the first step is, of course, to just decompress that zip file. I'm using here a tool that is called 7-zip. Therefore, I have to show more options and extract that here. Of course, any other software that is just decompressing zip files is good enough for that. 7-zip is one of the fastest with the best compression ratio. And we are using it a lot. So, wonderful. With that, I can directly delete the zip file and look into that folder. What I see there is an autorun.exe, so it is a setup set tool. I double click the setup set tool here. And getting prompted to install that on my computer. I have to agree terms, of course. That whole thing gets double checked, and once it is double checked, I can directly install the software. As you easily can see, there is the choice to install a server service with the whole stuff. That could be helpful, especially on an on-demand installation, and to show you some stuff later on. Clicking next will install that server service on my machine as well. And the installation progress starts, and I have to wait until everything is installed on my workstation. After the installation is finished, I can start to configure my job configuration if I like to, but I don't want to do that here. I will do that later. So I just click on Finish and my installation is done. I can also, if I like to do that, delete now my installation folder, but I let it on the machine. I don't know, maybe later on I want to install something more. So this is that. Now back, of course, to our main front end. Here we are. Here we have started. There is one thing I want to show you additionally to that, and this is of course the main important entry quick start guide. That quick start guide is important because it shows you all the capabilities and everything what you can do with the One Identity Manager on-demand Starling edition. As you easily can see, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of a lot of pictures and other stuff that show you what you have installed and what you need to do. What I'm doing here is of course a little bit just from my mind for you. Look into that. If you install that first time, maybe that document will help you. Again, it is easy to reach out. You have only to go here to that very quick start, to that tiny quick start link here. So next step, what we want to do. We can't open a web front end yet. Reason for is we don't have identities in our database. So there is something to do. We can sign in with a system user if we like to, of course, but therefore we need to create a connection first. And the, I like to say default connection type is of course to use an application server. So let's do that. I copy the URL to my application server and I just open the tool that is called Launchpad. Launchpad was installed on my computer, so I will just pin it to the taskbar. There it is, and directly start it. So, if Launchpad starts the first time, as you easily can see, there is no database connection available. So the first thing I have to do is to create a database connection. Therefore, I add new connection. And I can now choose between a SQL server and an application server. I will take, of course, the application server configuration. I need now the HTTP address to this application server. This is what I have in my clipboard. I copied it from the page first, and as you easily can see, it automatically checks if that is available and a cert exists. And I say finish. With that, I should now have a database connection. Here you can see that database connection. After a short while of installation, you easily can see that here the authentication method box and the user and the password will appear. This could take a while because the connection have to be established first. To sign in, the next step is to use a system user because up front there is only a system user available for a login. Therefore, I just go back into my web portal. In the web portal, there is, of course, a system user available. You can see that here, CCC admin. I take that system user. I can easily switch back and forth. So that is my system user. And I take the password for that system user. This is the password. And then I try to connect. And I can see my options. And the first thing to do, of course, is just to run my manager to get informed what is in my database. So I switch here to tools. I'm searching for the manager tool. There it is. And I can hit run. By the way, if you see grayed out runs like here, this is a sign that with the application server, this tool is not usable. Therefore, I will use a SQL Connect. This is something I will do in a second. So I just run the manager to show you that that works well. And shortly after, my manager will get started. I use the same authenticator here. That means the same access to the same application server as before. This is something that gets auto-configured by the Launchpad, so I have only to wait until that tool is available. And if we look into the data, for example, into the identities, we will easily see that in the identities, there is, of course, no identity available. This is now something I have to create. We can have a look into our Active Directory if necessary. And even there, easy to see, there is no user available. That means before we can do something else, we have to ensure that we get some users and of course some identities imported into the identity manager. So that means it is necessary to create a synchronization project to your authentication authority. For my second try, that means using directly a database access, I will just hit here on Add New Connection. I will select the database access this time, and I need some more information from my front end. First, the database server. This is something which is described here. Database address, there we are. After I enter the database address, a user and a password is necessary. So username for the database and password for the database. And because it exists, I can also take the database name and try to do it. And what I get is, of course, as you easily can see here, an error message that says that this address here, that IP address, this is my local outside IP address, is not allowed to connect to that database. And this is good for two reasons. First of all, to show you the error message. Secondly, of course, to get that IP address. So I just copy that IP address to my clipboard. And I step back into my web portal where I see all my configuration. And here is something that is called Manage Database Access. I enter Manage Database Access. Here I can copy in the IP address. Unfortunately, it disappeared, so I have just to copy it again. And here it is. And of course, I have to save. And once that IP address is saved, I should now easily possible to access to the database. So unfortunately, I have to do exactly the same again. SQL Server. I need to enter all the values and addresses, starting with the SQL Server. And this time, voila, it works. Here you can see I'm now connected with my database. I need to wait a little bit until that configuration shows me the whole configuration again. There we are. I can now use my system admin again. And the password. And as you easily can see, I'm connected again. This time I'm connected as a database user. Yeah, you can see this is my database access here. You are directly connected with the database. And if you now, for example, look into the tool section, then you will see, for example, for my job queue info, also the run that was not available with the application server before. And that will help me as well to look into my system, for example, to double check if my initial installation was completely done. And here, easy to see, database queue is empty, job queue is empty as well. With that, all in initial installation, it's done. So the last thing we need to talk about is what's to do if I want to connect from on-prem to my on-demand installation regarding service. Because the first thing what I now need to do is, for example, to synchronize my Active Directory, my on-prem Active Directory into the on-demand installation. Therefore, I need a job service, and this job service is the last thing I want to show you how to install that. What's to do? I have to go to my Launchpad. Here is my Launchpad. It's already connected. I'm using the application server connection, if you here can see. And a lot of people will now say, I have to go to configure, and in configure, there will then be the option just to add or modify a job server. But there's a better way to do that. I step to installation overview again, and there is one thing, it's like a little bit like a hint, one identity manager service for the database. I can reuse that even if it is configured, and I can use then a wizard. So I click on that. I have as well to step into a permitted situation. Yes, here I am. And what happens? A wizard will be created. This is the wizard, and that wizard is something I will now use to install my local service. In my very specific environment here, I have only a VMware workstation. I will install it on the workstation, but typically you will install that, of course, on a server. First thing to do is I have to select my database connection. I'm using the application server connection here. And shortly after a small delay, I can start to log into my database. I need, as you can see here, a system user for that. And the first thing to do, of course, is to put in here my system username. Therefore, I just step over to the system user and put that in here. And then I copy, of course, the password, and I put in the password. Here it is, and step next. And this is then the next screen where a lot of people are struggling often with, because they now try to fill in here some information. But this, of course, is the information of my already existing on-demand job service. That is a job service that is installed on demand. It is the one that takes care of my database. So the first thing what's to do is I need here, of course, to add another one. So the first thing is to click add. This is now my new server, IMOD-SE. That is my workstation name, that I understand that. This is the queue name automatically created. And that is IAMW001.IAM.corp. This is my environment. Next. Then I have, of course, as well to create or to check everything I want to install on that local machine. So I will just take, of course, the job service. This is important. For Exchange, some other stuff maybe I want to do. Currently, I only want to synchronize my Active Directory, so I take that. I can as well check some other stuff. That is not really hard if I don't do that, because later on I can as well check some others. Nevertheless, it is sometimes helpful if you start with a broader selection, because then you have not to run the installer again. However, I'm happy with that right now, so I click on Next. Now I can add some roles here, and that is locally. Active Directory, that's great with me. CSV server, it's helpful, I'm sure. Report server, yes, it's my default report server, that's cool. It is not a domain controller, it's not a gateway. I have here generic database connectors, why not? That could be helpful. Generic server, it is not a generic server. Home server, I'm sure it's not. So, and so on. You can see, you can just select some of these roles. That later on helps me then to configure that. I click Next. And now I can write my configuration. The configuration per se, as you easily can see, is pre-configured. So there is a SQL provider part of it. The SQL provider here is something I could configure, but I don't want to configure it here. The reason for is that I want to use my app server. And so I remove that from here and insert the app server. Therefore, I need the application server job provider. There we are. And now I configure the application job server provider authentication string. This is the first thing. I need a username. Wonder, we have only one. So I take that for now. By the way, if you are interested in other users, no problem, you can create some, but then you have to know, and if this is done, for example, using Designer, then you can use them as well. Next thing to configure, of course, is my connection string. So I click on edit. And what's necessary there is the application server URL. Application server URL is here the app server URL. Here we are. I take that, put that into my field. It works. So, and queue name is configured, great. And if I'm sure that all configuration is made, I can just click next. And I get prompted here just to select my installation source. To do so, on my computer, installation sources are stored on the C drive. So I have to go on the C drive. There is installation. And here is the on-demand installation source. I select that. And I get the green checkbox. The green checkbox says that this is, of course, the directory that contains a valid source. With next, I have then here to put in a private key file. Yeah, that is a little bit a problem here because I don't have a private key file yet, but I will just create one. And therefore, I have to go in my web page down below. There is the encryption key. And I will just copy the encryption key and will generate here in my installation folder a new text file, which is my private.key file. And in that private.key file, I will then just put in the encryption key. So, and with that, I'm then able, of course, as well to select my private key file. It is, as seen on C here in my installation folder. And with next, I can now register my service. To ensure that works, I will now use a local user here. Because I don't have a domain yet, I will just use imw001 /user, and I will as well use a password for that. Of course, again, for our purpose here, that will work just to test my service. But if I want to synchronize a domain, I should be a member of the domain. And of course, I should be here, use a service account, which allow that. And if I then click next, I will get asked if at the end that account should be elevated. Yes, that is okay. And what happens then is that automatically now that service gets installed locally on that very specific machine. Seconds after, I can start that and can figure out if it is able to connect to my database. And if I see then a lot of green lights, I would say we were successful. Next, finish, and I will look into my services list. I have to refresh. So one service more. There should be now one identity service. Let me find that on identity. There it is. It is already running. So and now let's directly test it. Therefore, I need to use the HTTP protocol, and local host is my machine here, and I will use port 1880. And as you easily can see, this one is running. If I look into that, you see an error message. This error message is from a start before. I was running here into an issue because I have installed together with my workstation as well a server service to get the service tools. And then the wizard I used was installing another server service. You can easily see that here. This was server service I've installed with the setup set. This is the server service I've installed with the installer, both on the same machine. They directly have the same port configured because they don't know something from each other. And that was my error here. But as you easily can see, that error is now solved and my machine has already started without any problems here that server service. That's it. Now I can start to build a synchronization project and to synchronize my Active Directory. In my case, I don't have one, so I can't synchronize something, but that is something you can do. For all the people who are now interested to do that, the manual will help you, of course, but honestly, this on-demand training is not or does not have that purpose just to inform you how Identity Manager works. Therefore, we do have foundation classes. Therefore, we have implementation certification classes. And if you run through that, it will work properly. What could be helpful is, in a very last thing, is to look into that manual for the on-demand service again. And in the manual to look at that very specific graph here, which shows you how that on-demand installation in reality works. It is exactly the same what we did. We have used here a local admin workstation. This is the blue frame here. And this local admin workstation is as well our server because I installed the server service there. Nevertheless, that is the last steps here on premise where I installed my software. That whole thing is then connected directly here to the on-demand server. That means One Identity Cloud. And there you will then have everything available to work with. What is now missing is, of course, the part here on the right side where we connect, for example, to an Azure Active Directory or to an on-prem Active Directory. This will now be the first steps. But again, that is nothing other else than if you do the same from an on-prem perspective. You will as well use the on-prem server service, the one we installed at the end. The green part was completely installed by setting up the on-demand version of Identity Manager. There is nothing I have to do. With that, I wish you good luck just to get your installation working and see you later.